Alright, hear me out. I believe that the majority of multiplayer game modes should be free to play. Or rather, my argument is that they might as well be, but that doesn't make for a very good title. So why do you ask? Well, because we've long been in a state in gaming where microtransactions and DLCs dominate the field. In 2021, almost 60% of video game sales were made up of subscriptions, DLCs and microtransactions. But the even more interesting number is that in 2020, microtransactions made up 88% of digital game spending, which is where we essentially remove all physical sales from the equation. So what does this mean? Well, despite the overwhelming sales that games like Elden Ring, God of War, Ragnarok and Hogwarts Legacy are reporting, it's really only a fraction of what is being spent on, let's say, skins in Fortnite or CSGO. Before we get into this, I just want to get ahead of anyone only watching a fraction of the video before telling me I'm stupid and say, yes, I might be stupid, but that doesn't mean I'm wrong. Alright? And also, my point is that the multiplayer mode should be free to play, but I still understand why they aren't just yet. So if you're already tired of me, you can skip the video now. We did it, my friend. Thanks for watching. Anyways, I'm not saying that every game with multiplayer features should be free to play. I honestly think that games like Risk of Rain 2 or Valheim should cost money, but I honestly can't find an argument for why every new edition of FIFA or Call of Duty should be 60 to 70 bucks. FIFA, for example, barely makes any changes to the offline game modes, or online for that matter, but they still rake in millions upon millions throughout their online game modes. Around 29% of EA's income in 2020 came from Ultimate Team game modes in their sports games. That's insane. I mean, for those of you not in the know, every time a new edition of FIFA is released, not only do you have to pay $60 for the game, all of the money you spend on Ultimate Team is gone because it doesn't carry over. And I don't think there's any justification for any EA Sports game to charge more than $20 for a new yearly edition. To be honest, I think Ultimate Team should just be a free service that is separate like Warzone and Call of Duty. And speaking of Call of Duty, Activision Blizzard made a whopping $5.1 billion in microtransactions in 2021 for games like World of Warcraft and Call of Duty. The multiplayer in Call of Duty is so riddled with microtransactions that it's a joke by now. There's no reason that Call of Duty multiplayer isn't free like Warzone, and then you could, buy the yearly campaign as a DLC for $20 to $30. But I know why they're doing it. It's because year after year people keep paying for it, because we do not want to miss out on the newest multiplayer release. We don't want to be left behind in the old editions, right? And I know that I sound like an entitled consumer, and I know that this doesn't apply to every single multiplayer game with microtransactions. It's a bit more nuanced and really depends on the intensity of the microtransaction. But honestly, to anyone old enough, think back to a time before microtransactions. Things worked out fine back then, and what's changed? We're still paying the same price, but companies are raking in millions upon millions more just for a few cosmetics. And this is not a call to ban microtransactions from games. I understand that it's here to stay, and I honestly don't care if people spend thousands on microtransactions in a game. As long as it's not pay to win, feel free to spend as much on cosmetics as you'd like. My argument is that if most of your income from multiplayer games are coming from microtransactions, then why are you even setting the price of entry for the consumer so high? It doesn't really make sense to me to see all these $60 to $70 games flooded with microtransactions from day one, especially not in Call of Duty or FIFA, where it's yearly releases and pretty much nothing carries over from one release to another. And yes, it makes sense financially, but just from a pure logical standpoint, it doesn't make sense to me. So what exactly are the pros and cons of making a game free to play? Well, for the pros, the only investment a player makes is time, so it's obviously an advantage for the player themselves. Furthermore, people tend to play multiplayer games in groups, so if the choice is between a $60 game or a free to play game, the risk is obviously way smaller with the free game. And in addition to this, think of this scenario. If a group of 4 are looking for a game but only 2 are willing to buy it, well then the chances are that you're losing out on 4 players because the 2 willing to spend money might not do it if the whole group doesn't. But if it's free, then you have 4 potential new players who would all maybe spend money on microtransactions. Or at least a few in the group would. But what about the game companies? Well, no initial cost for the players means that there are no risks for the consumers, giving you a larger potential player base, and hereby a larger chance of having people spend money on microtransactions and the like. I mean, the Asian market has long taken this model to prevent the massive spread of piracy in the region, and games like Fortnite and CSGO has long taken on the free-to-play model in a successful fashion. The pricing psychology is actually great for game companies because instead of paying a $60 flat fee at once, players usually buy microtransactions in small chunks, and little by little they can end up spending much more money than $60 without even thinking about it. And this might sound malicious, but it's already what's happening in games today, and no one is forcing you to pay for cosmetics. Although I know there's a lot of psychology wanting you to spend a lot of money on microtransactions, but in the bigger picture, no one is forcing you to do anything really. Right, so the cons are, well, games like Call of Duty's major selling point is the multiplayer, and that's why they made $1 billion in pre-order. Pre-orders are nice for investors because it's secured money right off the bat. And obviously if the game becomes free to play, this will go away, which will mostly hurt games made by indie developers or studios that aren't already projecting to make billions on microtransactions, right? And also, if everyone went free to play and risk for players are low in terms of engaging with a game, like all they have to do is download it, they would be more likely to try out more games. And in addition to that, you also have to factor in that if a person spent $60 on a game, they'd arguably be more likely to try and get the most out of that money, meaning they'll dedicate more time to the game because they're already invested in it. Video game companies would have to spend a lot more resources on trying to retain the players. And lastly, there's a risk that video games would be more prone to include pay-to-win options, but then again, I don't think the structure of microtransaction would or should have to change much from where it is today. And honestly, most of the cons are on the side of the game companies and contingent on the game companies making bad games. So while it may be a little unrealistic at the moment, I don't see many downsides from the consumer's point of view. And I really don't see any downsides in the consumers trying to advocate for this in the future. Trust me, the game companies are not going to want to lose out on microtransactions. If they have to go free to play due to pressure from the community and low sales, they probably will. Eventually. And look, I know that companies like Activision Blizzard and EA are still making bank from their yearly releases. Hell, even Rockstar Games are still raking in millions on a 10-year-old game like GTA 5. And I do understand that there really aren't any reason to make any of these games free to play as long as people are buying them. But it does look like more and more games are turning towards the free to play model. So don't think there's any avoiding a restructure of the payment model at some point in the future. But maybe I'm just wrong, and maybe these multiplayer games will continue to sustain with this model. But there are games like Fortnite, Genshin Impact, Counter-Strike and League of Legends that are proving that popular titles can not only survive but grow through the free-to-play model. And you're also ignoring a huge market in countries with lower income by charging full prices for these games, or at least the multiplayer modes. So will the multiplayer modes in games like Call of Duty and FIFA go free-to-play in the future? Who knows? Should they? Well, that's a whole other question, and I think you know my answer. I just want to emphasize again, I have no problem with them charging money for the single player or the offline game modes. I just think that for the multiplayer game modes, it might be worth considering going free to play. Thank you so much for watching this video. Consider leaving a like or comment or subscribing or even sharing it with your friends, and I hope that you enjoyed it whether or not you agree with me. I acknowledge that there are almost certainly things I didn't think about, so feel free to let me know what you think of this, and hopefully we can have a civil conversation about it. Either way, I had fun ranting about microtransactions for a bit, so thank you. Bye bye.